This issue of Japanese history continues from the previous issue, looking at the Meiji Restoration and its aftermath. I will explain the Seinan War, the last and greatest civil war in modern Japan. The Seinan War was a rebellion started by Takamori Saigo, a prominent figure in the Meiji Restoration. This rebellion was much bigger than any other rebellion that had ever been launched by the samurai. In the previous issue, I explained how the Satsuma army was forced to retreat after losing the Battle of Tabaruzaka. From this point on, the Satsuma forces fought a continuous battle of retreat. I would like to skip the individual battles this time. The government forces had overwhelmingly superior naval power compared to the Satsuma forces. Taking advantage of their naval power, they landed in the southern part of Kumamoto and carried out a strategy to separate the Satsuma forces from their base, Kagoshima, and to divide the supply routes of the Satsuma forces. This army was commanded by Kiyotaka Kuroda, a native of Satsuma. He was also the second prime minister. The Satsuma forces were shocked by the government forces that appeared behind them and immediately turned their troops against them. However, this Satsuma army also fought against Kuroda's government forces and was defeated. The Satsuma army then lifted the siege of Kumamoto Castle and rebuilt its forces further south. Kurino then set up a new line of defense and made a plan to destroy the government forces moving south. This turned out to be a major battle consisting of 8,000 Satsuma troops. This was the largest battle since the Battle of Sekigahara in 1600, the Battle of Jodo on April 20th. Kurino was prepared for this battle to be his deathbed, but with the hard persuasion of those around him, he decided to retreat. The outcome of the battle was already in sight. The Satsuma forces fought their way back slowly. On August 15th, when they were cornered on the border of Kagoshima Prefecture, Saigo announced that he would take command of the battle. Saigo, who had remained silent until then, must have felt that the time had finally come to make his final stand. The Satsuma army, also defeated in this battle, retreated to Kagoshima. Saigo said, "My only plan is to fight to the death against the government forces. Those who want to die with me should stay, and those who do not want to die should surrender. I leave it to each of you to decide." Thus, the samurai of the Satsuma army surrendered one after another, and those who followed Saigo numbered about 1,000. On September 1st, Saigo entered Kagoshima. The Satsuma army holed up in Kagoshima's Shiroyama. Saigo was already prepared to die, but some samurai who admired Saigo escaped and entered negotiations with the government forces in order to save Saigo's life. Sumiyoshi Kawamura from Satsuma wrote a letter of surrender to Saigo, and Aritomo Yamagata from Choshu, who was a close friend of Saigo, wrote a letter advising Saigo to commit suicide. Saigo ignored them, and on September 24th, a general attack by the government forces began. It was a battle between a Satsuma army of less than 300 men and a government army of 70,000 men. As the soldiers around him were falling, Saigo said, "I think that's enough." As the Satsuma military leaders who adored Saigo kneeled and watched, Saigo sat upright and bowed in reverence. When he was ready, Saigo committed seppuku, and his subordinate samurai interceded with him. And all the samurai, including Kurino, saw to it that all the samurai charged into the government army, and all the samurai died. Thus ended the Seinan War, the largest and last civil war in modern Japan. The Seinan War was a major factor in promoting the modernization of Japan. It is no exaggeration to say that the samurai were virtually extinguished in this war. The year after Saigo's death, Toshimiki Okubo, who was virtually single-handedly running the government, was assassinated by a disgruntled samurai. Since Takeyoshi Kido had already died of illness, the leaders of the Meiji Restoration were all dead within 10 years of the revolution. These three men were around 50 years old when they died, in the prime of their working lives. From this point on, the Meiji government would form a new era led by Hirobumi Ito and Aritomo Yamagata. The cost of the Seinan War was 41 million, and tax revenue at the time was 48 million. In other words, most of the tax revenue was spent on this war. This caused the government to scrimp and scrape for paper money, resulting in inflation. In response to this inflation, then Finance Minister Masayoshi Matsukata implemented a bold monetary policy, which in turn led to a severe recession known as Matsukata deflation. In this process, peasants with little capital sold their fields and moved into urban areas, where they became low-paid laborers working for capitalists, creating the foundation for the development of modern Japanese industry. Independent farmers also sold their fields to wealthy farmers and became peasants. Thus, the gap between the rich and poor in Japan became wider than during the Edo period. The Civil War also fundamentally changed Japan's military policy. The victory of the commoners' army over the samurai army led to the establishment of conscription. In reality, however, the Satsuma samurai feared the latest weapons of the government army and the personal guard, which consisted of samurai from within the government army. It took 2,000 bullets for a commoner soldier to kill one samurai in Satsuma. Considering that it took 500 bullets to kill one Russian soldier in the Russo-Japanese War, it is clear how much bullets were wasted by commoners. In addition, the morale of commoner soldiers was very low, and the Meiji government realized the necessity of spiritual education for soldiers based on this lesson. The Meiji government believed that the morale of the Satsuma soldiers was high because Takamori Saigo was the general-in-chief. Therefore, the Meiji government planned to raise the morale of the army by making the emperor the general of the army. The Meiji government made maximum use of the emperor to strengthen its own fragile political base after the revolution. School education became the perfect place to deify the emperor. This education succeeded in raising the authority of the government, and by the Showa period, the emperor was so revered that he was deified. After the Seinan War, Japan would accelerate its modernization. After the Seinan War, the samurai gave up the idea of overthrowing the government through the use of force. Instead, they started a liberal civil rights movement led by Taisuke Itagaki. This was a movement to hold elections, initiate a diet, and create a political system centered on the diet, rather than having only Satsuma Choshu people conduct politics. This movement was led by wealthy farmers rather than by samurai. These movements prompted the government to promulgate a constitution and establish a national assembly. Japan was to adopt a constitutional monarchical political system. Japan was to improve its domestic system, enrich its nation, train its soldiers, and become a power on par with Europe and the United States.